In March 2024, beneath the frozen surface of Lake Königssee in southern Germany, a team of environmental divers stumbled upon a corroded steel hatch buried in glacial sediment. The hatch, marked only with faint Reichsadler insignia, led to a sealed corridor preserved in near-perfect condition since 1945. Within weeks, the Bavarian State Archive and NATO Historical Division had cordoned off the site, labeling it Restricted Zone 19A. Inside the underground complex lay evidence of an operation absent from every official record, Project Edelweiss. What began as a geological anomaly has now become one of the most unsettling rediscoveries of post-war Europe, exposing a chapter of Nazi experimentation so secret even Allied intelligence never recorded it. Chapter 1: Discovery beneath Lake Königssee. The first report arrived on March 17, 2024 at 0642 CET, logged under incident number BAY ENV 0423-119 by the Bavarian Environmental Authority. It described anomalous metallic structure beneath sediment layer during a dive survey for a regional hydroelectric project. The coordinates 47°3518 in 12°5922 placed the anomaly directly below the southern ridge of Lake Königssee, an area previously off limits due to avalanche risks and wartime debris warnings. 3 divers confirmed a circular hatch, 2 meters in diameter, sealed with riveted bolts and partially embedded in limestone. Photographs revealed faded markings resembling a Reichsadler, the imperial eagle insignia used by Nazi command units, and the partial word Heeresversuchsanstalt, Army Research Facility. Within 48 hours, German authorities halted civilian access to the site. The Bundesarchiv dispatched a historian specializing in Third Reich logistics, Dr. Lucas Hartmann, while NATO's historical division quietly attached 2 consultants under the designation Joint Recovery Task 24K. The presence of NATO archivists raised immediate suspicion among local press, who were told the site was a chemical hazard zone. By the time the first team entered the hatch on April 2nd, all media references to the discovery had been deleted from regional news servers under emergency data redaction protocols. The descent began at U0813. Footage recovered from a body camera, later authenticated by the Bundeskriminalamt, BKA, showed a reinforced tunnel descending 12 meters into the rock. Power cables still lined the walls, their rubber insulation preserved by the cold. A rusted door at the tunnel's end bore an embossed steel plate stamped Edelweiss, 1944. When the team pried it open, they found an airlock leading into a corridor lined with laboratory doors, all sealed shut and numbered sequentially from A1 to A9. Instruments, steel tables, and chemical storage containers lay perfectly preserved. Coated in frost, one room contained 2 decomposed corpses in Luftwaffe uniforms, their identity tags removed. Another held a set of file drawers fused together by time. When those drawers were finally opened, archivists found documents labeled Geheime Reichssache, Projekt Edelweiss, Standort Königssee, 12-43. Most pages were heavily water damaged, but a few remained legible. They detailed a wartime initiative under the Oberkommando des Heeres, OKH, supervised by a Dr. Walter Kruger, formerly of the University of Heidelberg's Physiology Department. The papers referred to low-temperature adaptation experiments conducted on volunteers from occupied territories. Marginal notes mentioned Kälteresistent serum, or cold-resistance serum, and the use of a cryogenic containment unit, designated Type 07, designed to preserve biological samples at sub-zero temperatures for indefinite durations. Dr. Hartmann's analysis connected Project Edelweiss to an obscure entry in a declassified OSS memo dated February 1946, referencing possible continuation of German biothermal research under US custody. However, no subsequent record existed in Allied archives, suggesting the project either failed or was erased. Forensic teams confirmed the bunker's internal temperature had remained near freezing since its sealing, due to a natural permafrost pocket beneath the mountain. Inside a central chamber labeled Kälteversuchslaber, investigators found rows of glass cylinders filled with a viscous amber-colored liquid. Each was tagged with a 4-digit number and a red triangle. Radiation scans showed mild gamma activity consistent with isotopic contamination, implying early use of unstable compounds for preservation. On April 9th, during the fourth excavation phase, a technician retrieved a sealed film canister marked Reichsfilmarchiv, confidential. The footage, digitized days later in a Munich forensic lab, revealed grainy black and white images of men in white coats operating machinery that resembled modern cryogenic systems. One frame clearly showed Dr. Krüger standing beside a horizontal containment tank labeled Subject 23. The next frames were corrupted, but temperature readings, handwritten on the film margin, showed 112, far below any documented German capability of the era. By late May, media pressure intensified. Satellite photos leaked online showed a network of tents, decontamination units, and excavation cranes along the lake's southern edge. German defense officials refused to comment, and the federal government issued a restricted disclosure order under Paragraph 12 of the War Secrets Act. Yet independent divers reported increased military patrols and the establishment of a 5-kilometer exclusion zone. Local residents began circulating rumors of ghost lights under the ice and unmarked vehicles moving through the night. In June, the Bundesarchiv released a heavily redacted preliminary report. It concluded that Project Edelweiss had been a late war attempt to develop biomedical survival adaptations for extreme conditions, possibly for high-altitude or Arctic warfare. However, subsequent internal memos, later leaked anonymously to the press, suggested a different interpretation. One document, reference BND CL 014725, noted human cryonic trials resulting in complete cessation of metabolic activity with partial revival indicators. The phrasing ignited controversy within the scientific community. If genuine, it implied Nazi-era scientists had achieved a form of suspended animation decades before it was theoretically possible. Weeks later, the site was abruptly sealed again. A NATO transport convoy removed dozens of containers under armed guard, their manifest marked for joint analysis, Brussels Secure Facility. When journalists attempted to access the area, they were detained under national security statutes. No further updates were issued. By autumn 2024, whispers circulated within academic circles of recovered biological samples, now held in an undisclosed laboratory in Belgium. Dr. Hartmann vanished from public record after an interview with Der Spiegel, where he claimed the real danger was not what they built, but what survived with it. In December, an internal memo from the Federal Office for Radiation Protection quietly noted unexplained isotopic interference patterns consistent with recent activation of dormant compounds. To this day, the true nature of Project Edelweiss remains sealed behind layers of classification and political silence. What began as a simple environmental survey at the edge of a tranquil Bavarian lake has revealed an undercurrent of history so dark, so meticulously erased, that its rediscovery threatens to rewrite what we thought the Reich scientists were capable of. The hatch beneath Lake Königssee is no longer a relic. It is a doorway to a secret that refuses to stay buried. Chapter 2. The Krüger Archives Unsealed. In August 2024, 4 months after the Königssee bunker's discovery, a secondary breakthrough occurred at the Bundesarchiv branch in Koblenz. A junior archivist named Eva Reinhardt, tasked with cross-referencing medical files from disbanded Wehrmacht research units, stumbled upon a mislabeled folder buried within the 1952 intake collection of captured documents. The folder, coded WWII Crew 122B, bore no index entry and had been sealed since its acquisition. When Reinhardt pried it open, she found a stack of brittle carbon copies stamped Projekt Edelweiss, Personalakten Dr. Walter Krüger. The file contained letters, receipts, and a classified directive dated 14th November 1943, signed by General Feldmarschall Wilhelm Keitel himself. Its contents revealed the official commissioning of a facility for specialized physiological trials in the Alpine zone, under utmost secrecy of the Reich Chancellery. Among the documents were pages from Krüger's personal notebook, written in precise, Gothic script. They described the physiological limits of human endurance in sub-zero environments, but more disturbing were entries referencing serum E77 and thermal threshold 3. Krüger's notes spoke of volunteers from Eastern labor camps, their reactions recorded in clinical detachment. One entry, dated 3rd February 1944, mentioned successful metabolic suspension for duration exceeding 72 hours. partial revival achieved with intravenous heat catalyst. This claim, unsupported by any known wartime technology, sent shockwaves through the research team analyzing the materials. The discovery prompted the reactivation of the Königssee site's investigation. NATO's Historical Oversight Board authorized a multi-agency task force, codenamed Phoenix Ledger, bringing together forensic scientists, historians, and intelligence officers. Declassified correspondence between Krüger and a facility in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, referenced only as Heereslager 12, suggested logistical transfers of biothermal units and subject containers. Satellite imagery from post-war reconnaissance. Archives revealed that V12's coordinates corresponded to a now collapsed mine shaft within the Wetterstein Mountains, sealed by American engineers in 1946. To trace the operation's lineage, Reinhardt and her supervisor requested access to captured German records stored in the US National Archives under the Berlin Document Center collection. Weeks later, they received digitized microfilm reels labeled T301-127, Wehrmacht Medical Projects, Bavaria, 1943-45. Reel 4 contained several communications between the Oberkommando and Krüger's research division, including a requisition form for 20 biological specimens from the Flossenburg concentration camp, transferred under Action Dämmerung, an operation previously believed to concern only weapons testing. The deeper they delved, the more inconsistencies emerged. Krüger's personnel file listed him as deceased in April 1945 during an Allied air raid on Berchtesgaden. Yet a later British intelligence memo from 1948, MI6 OP Sable 7A, noted an unverified sighting of a German physiologist matching Krüger's description at a detention camp in Austria, later exfiltrated under Operation Paperclip Review. No US file confirms his arrival, but missing segments in Paperclip intake manifests from 1947 show 3 unaccounted scientists under temporary medical classification. In September, Reinhardt received an encrypted email from an anonymous address containing a single attachment. A scanned US Army memo dated 12th June 1952. Subject line, Disposition of Materials, Königssee Facility. The document referenced biological containment units recovered intact, transferred to Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Attached was a shipping manifest listing 4 steel containers with serial numbers identical to those recovered under Lake Königssee in 2024. The implication was staggering. The Allies had recovered and relocated at least part of Project Edelweiss decades ago, concealing it under Cold War research initiatives. As Reinhardt and her team prepared to verify the memo, her access credentials to the Bundesarchiv network were suddenly revoked. 2 days later, her office was sealed under data contamination protocols. A colleague reported that 3 unmarked vehicles had been seen leaving the facility that night, escorted by Bundeswehr police. Reinhardt's personal laptop and external drives were confiscated. She was placed on administrative leave for breach of classified digital property. When journalists attempted to reach her for comment, she was unreachable, her apartment vacated, and mail returned unopened. Meanwhile, in Washington, a quiet inquiry circulated through declassified Cold War records. Researchers uncovered a 1955 Senate oversight transcript referring to Project A-17, cryogenic preservation research. The testimony, now public, mentioned imported biological samples of uncertain origin, studied under the Chemical Corps Division. The cross-referenced code A-17 matched one found in Krüger's own correspondence. This revelation reignited international controversy, forcing NATO to acknowledge for the first time that portions of recovered Nazi research had been integrated into Western defense programs. In October, a team of journalists from Die Welt published a leaked image allegedly showing a refrigerated chamber within Aberdeen's Historical Records Division. Inside were glass vials containing amber fluid labeled E77, Specimen 3A. The photo, verified through metadata as genuine, was quickly taken down after a government takedown request citing national security and public safety. However, once circulated, it was impossible to contain. The term Krüger serum began trending on global social platforms, while official agencies issued contradictory statements about the sample's authenticity. By late 2024, Phoenix Ledger was quietly dissolved, its members reassigned or placed under non-disclosure agreements. Internal NATO memos described the ongoing Edelweiss investigation as compromised by external exposure and unverifiable data breaches. Yet within restricted circles, whispers persisted of a second, still-sealed archive, Kruger's personal microfilm logs, reportedly retrieved from a farmhouse near Mittenwald in 1947 and hidden by US intelligence. Though the world's attention shifted elsewhere, those who had seen the unredacted materials spoke privately of one chilling line, handwritten on the final page of Kruger's recovered notebook. The body sleeps. The memory does not. It remains unclear whether he meant his subjects, his research, or himself. The archives had opened a door no one was prepared to walk through, and behind it lay not just the forgotten crimes of a dying regime, but the scientific ambition that survived its fall. Chapter 3. Operation Paperclip Shadows. By early 2025, attention surrounding Project Edelweiss had shifted from Bavaria to the archives of Fort Detrick, Maryland. A Freedom of Information request by an independent researcher, Mark Dalton, uncovered a long-forgotten subfolder within the US Army Chemical Corps' digitized Cold War records. It was labeled BioCryo Transferred Assets, Europe 1947-1953. Among the hundreds of routine reports was a single unindexed file, BioCryo 47 12K. Subject: Kruger, Walter, Medical Division, Aberdeen Liaison. The document contained an unsigned memorandum dated 22 November 1947, confirming arrival of personnel and containers from Bavaria for Project A17, along with the chilling note: ensure continued classification under standard paperclip parameters. Subject exhibits valuable technical capability. Dalton's discovery reignited speculation that Dr. Walter Kruger, long presumed dead, had in fact been among the hundreds of German scientists covertly relocated to the United States under Operation Paperclip. His alleged field, cryogenic physiology, had been of interest to both the US Air Force and the early space medicine programs. Yet the deeper Dalton looked, the more the record blurred. A subsequent file from 1950 listed Kruger as inactive, health deterioration. The next document, dated 1952, marked his status as relocated to private sector under civil contract. No company name was listed, only a US government vendor ID C47398, which cross-referenced to a dissolved entity in New Mexico, Ridge Systems Research. Ridge Systems appeared nowhere in federal registries before 1952, but internal correspondence between its founders, obtained years later via the declassified Blue Sky Defense Review, revealed the presence of foreign consultants with advanced biomedical expertise. One memo from 1953 referenced temperature suspension trials of mammalian tissue, exceeding viability thresholds. The listed supervising biologist was Dr. W.K., initials that match Kruger's. A freight log showed shipments from Aberdeen to Ridge's address in Los Alamos County between 1953 and 1954, listed under Equipment, Refrigeration Apparatus, Classified Origin. Dalton's research caught the attention of a European investigative outlet, Archive Nullpunkt, which had already been pursuing the Edelweiss story since the Königssee discovery. They invited him to Germany to cross-verify his findings with NATO's sealed report. What he found stunned him. Internal NATO cables, leaked to Archive Nullpunkt, showed correspondence between the German Ministry of Defense and the US Department of Energy dated June 1971. The message referred to termination of shared custody over biological containment units, E77, E80. It confirmed the existence of surviving samples and their repatriation to American soil under Strategic Biomaterials Directive 5129. As Dalton pieced these elements together, a pattern emerged. Kruger's work had not ended with Nazi Germany. It had evolved under US supervision, disguised as Cold War innovation. Several internal army reports from the 1960s described physiological stasis studies conducted at Fort Detrick and Holloman Air Force Base, projects officially linked to space medicine but clearly built on earlier German research. One 1964 memorandum even referenced cryogenic suspension experiment E77, yielding prolonged tissue viability, directly citing Kruger's designation. On 7th January 2025, Dalton was granted limited access to the Fort Detrick archives under supervision. In Vault Room B2, He was shown a single microfilm labeled Creo Hist 1951-1954. As he scrolled through frame 38, he froze. There, among blacked-out entries, was a legible line. Kruger, advisory role, Project Deep Freeze, Los Alamos. Terminated 18th of May 1954. Next to it, in handwriting, someone had scribbled non-natural cause. No further details followed. The next frames were missing, cut from the reel with surgical precision. Dalton left Fort Detrick shaken. Weeks later, he contacted Archiv Nullpunkt again, intending to publish his findings. But before the report went live, he received a cease and desist letter from the US Department of Defense, citing unauthorized disclosure of restricted biological materials. Within days, his digital files were remotely locked through his institutional cloud server, and his account access was revoked. Colleagues reported seeing plainclothes officers visiting his university office in Virginia. He resigned shortly afterward and has not appeared publicly since February 2025. The official narrative remains unchanged. Operation Paperclip brought valuable scientific minds to the United States, accelerating post-war progress in medicine and technology. Yet documents emerging from this shadow archive suggest a more unsettling reality, that the ethical line between victor and vanquished blurred long before history was written. Recently, an anonymous intelligence source provided Archiv Nullpunkt with what appears to be an internal department of energy email chain from 2003, the thread references, legacy containment issues linked to Project A17, archives and sample degradation beyond acceptable safety, thresholds. The final message, sent from a Los Alamos account, includes one sentence that chills every investigator who reads it. Residual compound remains active at 78 degc, per Kruger's original calculations. If authentic, this means that something from Project Edelweiss, some remnant of Kruger's serum or its byproducts, survived the decades intact. The ethical debate over Paperclip's legacy has always haunted post-war science. But now, as the circle closes around one vanished bunker, one forgotten scientist, and one unaccounted shipment of cryogenic materials, it has taken on an even darker question. What if the true success of Operation Paperclip was not the import of knowledge, but the quiet continuation of experiments humanity was never meant to repeat? Chapter 4. The Aberdeen Containment Incident. The first official mention of containment breach appeared in a heavily redacted Department of Defense incident report dated 9 April 1978. The heading read Chemical Core, Aberdeen Proving Ground, Bio-Cryo Facility 3. Nearly all details were blacked out except a few lines. Seepage from Cryo Unit 7 observed 0430 hours. Containment personnel exposed. Immediate lockdown initiated. For decades, this document meant nothing to historians. But in late 2024, following the renewed scrutiny surrounding Project Edelweiss, the US National Archives released a companion log that finally connected Aberdeen's 1978 incident to the Bavarian discovery. The log described stored biological medium labeled E77 and original container serial codes consistent with European origin. 1945 to 40s. Journalist Ellen Partridge, an American investigative reporter specializing in declassified intelligence, filed a records appeal to the Department of Defense in June 2024 under the Freedom of Information Act. After months of delay, she received a packet of photocopied pages labeled AR7783A, Internal Report, Cryogenic Anomaly, Facility 3. What she read filled her with dread. The report detailed a malfunction during an equipment inspection at 4:17 on the morning of April 9, 1978. A technician named Sergeant Charles L. Henderson had noticed condensation forming around a cryogenic tank designated E77 primary medium. The container, a stainless steel cylinder dated 1944 and marked with faded German lettering, had developed a microfracture in its valve housing. According to witness statements, when the leak occurred, the surrounding air temperature dropped instantly to 30 degrees C. Henderson collapsed before emergency teams arrived. The containment chamber's monitoring instruments recorded a brief spike in gamma emissions and a chemical reading identified as unknown organic complex. Two technicians, who attempted to remove Henderson's body later, suffered acute hypothermic burns despite wearing protective suits. The report concluded with the phrase, biological reaction possible, unknown mechanism, recommend permanent deactivation of Series E units. But Partridge's inquiry went further. Through a contact at the Department of Energy, she obtained internal correspondence between the Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRIAD, and Aberdeen's Facility 3 leadership. One message, dated 12 April 1978, referenced persistent cellular degradation within exposure area. The phrase was followed by a single redacted paragraph, except for 3 surviving words: self-replicating crystalline residue. The file included a laboratory photograph of Henderson's workstation. On the surface, a thin frost-like pattern was visible on stainless steel, resembling dendritic crystal growth. The story should have ended there, but 2 months later, in June 1978, a second report appeared in the archive, labeled Incident Follow-up, BioCryo E77B. It described the disposal of all E77 units through thermal neutralization at 1200 degrees C. Yet, appended notes from a technician suggested that only 3 of the 4 recorded units were ever logged. Into the destruction manifest, the 4th entry, container E77-3A, was marked pending confirmation, transferred to DOE custody. The initials beside the note were JHM, later identified as Dr. John H. Miles, who at the time served as a liaison scientist for Joint Defense Research. Miles's name appears again, 20 years later, in a 1999 internal DOE audit of legacy biological material retention under Project Icevault. When Partridge published her preliminary findings in January 2025, she was contacted by a retired Army engineer named Frank Keller, who claimed to have served at Aberdeen during the 1978 incident. Keller, now in his 80s, described the day the lab was sealed. "They told us it was refrigerant gas," he said in a recorded interview. "But we saw what came out of that tank. It wasn't gas. It was something that moved, like vapor turning solid, like it wanted to stay alive." Keller alleged that Miles personally oversaw the removal of a secondary cylinder the following night, under the escort of 2 unmarked trucks. No official records mention such a transfer. Partridge's investigation took her to Maryland, where she gained temporary access to an off-site warehouse used for archiving obsolete Army equipment. Inside one of the crates, she found an inventory sheet stamped DOE APG 1979, listing multiple cryogenic components. Item 4 on the list read, "Cylinder, steel, marking, E773A, do not tamper." No serial number followed. The entry had been crossed out in red ink. The warehouse supervisor, interviewed later, stated that several crates matching that batch were removed in 2002 by federal order and sent west for disposal. He could not specify where. When she cross-referenced the removal date, Partridge discovered that the 2002 transfer coincided with a Department of Energy project known as Cryo Heritage Preservation, a cleanup initiative following a congressional mandate to identify hazardous legacy materials. One of the listed sites was Los Alamos Substorage 5, Cryomaterials. Partridge filed another records request. It was denied on grounds of National Defense Information Classification. In February 2025, Partridge published an exposé titled "The Frozen Legacy, America's Coldest Secret." Within 24 hours, her article was removed from multiple platforms following legal threats. She received an official letter from the Department of Justice warning that unauthorized handling of controlled archival materials constituted a federal offense. But it was too late. The article had already been mirrored across private servers. Its final paragraph read, "The E77 material believed to have originated under Project Edelweiss was never fully destroyed. At least one container, marked 3A, remains unaccounted for. The US government continues to classify all information regarding its current status." Weeks later, independent researchers analyzing meteorological data noticed an anomaly. In January 2003, sensors near Los Alamos recorded a localized temperature depression of nearly 40 degrees C for 7 consecutive hours, confined to a radius of less than 200 meters. The data file's origin ID corresponded to a Department of Energy sensor grid. When questioned, DOE representatives attributed the readings to instrument malfunction. Today, the Aberdeen containment incident stands as one of the most obscure events in Cold War scientific history. Its connection to Project Edelweiss remains officially unacknowledged, yet the trail, from the Königssee bunker to the Kruger archives, to Paperclip's hidden transfers and the missing E77 cylinder, tells a single story whispered through generations of classified files. that a fragment of Nazi science survived beneath the layers of post-war secrecy, carried quietly from one laboratory to another, awaiting rediscovery. And perhaps, according to the data that no one admits exists, it has already reawakened once. Chapter 5. The Silence of Sector 19A. By mid-2025, all public discussion of Project Edelweiss had vanished from official channels. Search results were throttled, archived reports vanished from online repositories, and the Bavarian authorities declared the Königssee zone a permanent hydrogeological quarantine. Yet satellites still captured faint activity at night, temporary lighting grids beneath camouflage netting, intermittent power signatures, and heat traces in the same coordinates, where the hatch had first been uncovered. The restricted area was now officially designated Sector 19A. According to an internal NATO logistics manifest obtained by a whistleblower in July 2025, the site was under joint custodial review by the German Defense Ministry and a private contractor known as Helix Dynamics AG, a biomedical firm registered in Zurich with no public history before 2020. Local residents of Berchtesgaden began reporting deep mechanical sounds at night, like turbines running beneath the mountain. Journalists who approached the lake were detained and had their recording equipment confiscated under environmental protection violations. Within weeks, all local tour operators were forced to redirect boat routes away from the southern inlet. The Bavarian Interior Ministry claimed the measure was to protect sensitive glacial formations. Behind closed doors, however, a classified EU security briefing dated 3rd of August 2025 revealed that an internal investigation had detected non-standard radiological activity in meltwater samples collected downstream. The isotopic pattern matched readings from the Aberdeen containment files labeled E77. Helix Dynamics publicly denied any connection to military contracts, but a data breach later exposed correspondence between its CEO, Dr. Leonie Grau, and the Bundeswehr's Medical Research Directorate. The emails discussed reactivation thresholds and replication stasis models, referencing an attached file titled EDLW R3 protocol. The attachment was missing from the leak, but its file name echoed the original Project Edelweiss acronym. Dr. Grau, a molecular biologist educated in Zurich and formerly employed at a NATO biomedical center in Brussels, disappeared from public view in September. Her LinkedIn profile was deleted within hours of media inquiries. Meanwhile, a small team of European Parliament investigators, led by MEP Anaïs Delcourt, quietly requested site access under environmental oversight statutes. Their request was denied by NATO command, citing Article 5 confidentiality. 2 weeks later, Delcourt's office received an anonymous envelope containing 4 photographs printed on thermal paper. Each showed what appeared to be the interior of a newly excavated chamber beneath the Königssee bunker. In one, a series of reinforced glass tanks were arranged in a semicircle, each illuminated by a cold blue light. The labels on the tanks bore the code E77 continuation. The final photograph displayed a digital control screen reading cryogenic chamber integrity, stable, 112 the crags. Attempts to authenticate the images proved inconclusive, yet metadata analysis placed the originals within a 300-meter radius of Sector 19A's known perimeter. When the images circulated briefly through underground forums, they were swiftly taken down by automated copyright strikes registered to Helix Dynamics AG, Defense Contractor License B2187. That designation corresponds to a Swiss defense export license permitting biotechnological materials under restricted research supervision. No entity other than a government subcontractor could hold such authorization. In October 2025, a sudden regional blackout struck the Berchtesgaden district, lasting 47 minutes. Satellite imagery during the outage captured a single thermal bloom under the surface of Lake Königssee, radiating briefly before dissipating. The following morning, German emergency services issued a statement attributing the event to grid instability from construction equipment. But seismic instruments at the University of Munich recorded a low-frequency vibration, lasting exactly 47 minutes, originating 180 meters beneath the lake bed, the precise depth of the original Edelweiss corridor. 2 weeks later, NATO issued a memorandum to member states titled Termination of Cooperative Research at Site 19A. All personnel were withdrawn, The area remains sealed behind military fencing, guarded under the pretext of geological safety. Civilian drones attempting to photograph the site are electronically jammed within seconds. Requests for international inspection continue to be denied. What truly happened in those final weeks is known only to a handful of officials, but fragments of the leaked Helix communications suggest that Sector 19A was not simply a cleanup operation. A message dated 14th of September 2025, sent from Grau to an unidentified NATO recipient, contained the final recorded statement tied to Project Edelweiss. Thermal equilibrium achieved. Biological response consistent with 1944 documentation. Initiating recontainment protocol, the Königssee remains silent now, its surface undisturbed and glacially clear. Tourists still visit, unaware that beneath them lies a labyrinth of sealed steel corridors, built by men who believed they could freeze life itself. 80 years later, the past has been reburied, but not erased. The hatch is closed again, welded under the ice, guarded by those who insist nothing was ever there. And yet, every winter when the lake freezes over, the locals say the ice forms in perfect concentric rings, just above the coordinates of Sector 19A, where something still sleeps in the dark.